Hello and welcome to the Change Gang podcast with me, your host, Laura Ordile. I'm here to help you hold on to your sanity and your soul as you move through big change in your life. I'm here to guide you, inform you, and hopefully help you to triumph over trauma and the long list of symptoms that come along with it. This podcast series is to bring knowledge, share stories, and open up conversation around hope for those of you that suffer with the difficulties that present themselves in your life, from diagnosed or undiagnosed trauma. Labeled or not, I know you need help, and so do those that have graciously taken the time to have these conversations with me. So let's get to it.
Welcome to the Week Change Gang. So happy to have you here again. And I have an amazing gentleman with me today, Ben Kelly, who is the owner of Horwich Hypnotherapy. And I'm super excited to have a conversation with him today. So thanks for being here today, Ben. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. It's a pleasure.
I'm excited. So we talked a little bit, of course, ahead of time to just kind of chat and see what direction we wanted to go. One of the directions is we're going to talk a little bit about pain and trauma and kind of head into some of that, which is what this particular version of the podcast is about. So I'm happy to do that. How did you actually start working with trauma? Did pain management kind of lead you in that direction?
The beginnings of it was meditation. Started off, I'd say, around 14 years ago as a meditation teacher. And so often then I was seeing people with trauma around just helping them with breathing, helping them with staying in the moment. And obviously there's great benefit to those sorts of practices around people that have suffered from traumas. From there, once I started picking up more about hypnotic suggestion, more around learning the tools and techniques around hypnosis, then I started seeing that there was a lot more I was going to be able to do to help people to really free themselves from trauma and to get their lives back.
Doing some of the meditation and the breath work and things like that you did, that kind of is almost a little bit of a natural transition that moves you into hypnosis. And I would think that definitely the meditation, but I know a lot of hypnotherapists are really kind of diving into the breath work to help with the work that they do. Do you find that they really complement each other?
I really do. I find that breath work is a wonderful way into trance in itself. We can really, and this was a lot of what I was doing with myself as well, was using my breathing to go into trance-like states where then I could do a lot of my own personal work. And then I was also finding that some of the reports I was getting at the back of meditation sessions was around how much people felt like they'd sort of contacted parts of themselves that they'd put away for a long time. It was a real natural evolution. The route from guided meditation into subtle suggestion, into hypnotic suggestion, into hypnosis, it was almost seamless to an extent. Then once I actually went and formally studied hypnosis through a few different companies over here, as well as Mike Mandel, a bit close to yourself, it all became very, very natural. So what it looks like now is maybe a bit of a mix of everything, dependent on who's in, and sometimes about their expectation will depend on if we start with breath work or if we start more formally with an induction. I do find that the rhythm of the breath really just ground us, can center us, can take us into that place. And when we're talking about trauma, what a wonderful way to start making yourself feel safe, bringing yourself into the moment. A lot of people that come in already very agitated or already potentially because they've been thinking about it, they might have been booked in the diary for a good few weeks before I see them. They're already massively associated to the state before they've even entered. So I've found over the time that a lot of people have entered my room already quite upset, already quite agitated. I'm sure you've seen the same thing yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually just going to say that it's got to really make a difference for people who have had traumatic experiences or who even don't understand that maybe they've had quote unquote some trauma, because so many times they come in and they have a symptom that has shown up in their life, panic, anxiety, sleeplessness, something like that, that they're not even aware is likely connected to something that's the root way back here that was some form of trauma in your life, because trauma is different when you're 2 years old. It's when you're 32 years old. So you might not necessarily think of something that happened when you were a tiny person as being trauma, but it can lead to, over the years, something that causes that. So it's got to be very soothing, especially if they are aware of the trauma, to come in and just take the time to breathe.
To be safe here, for this to immediately be a room where they can be just here and now. Like you're saying, whether or not they know. I'm not one for labels. I don't need you to be traumatized. All I care about is your experience. If you're having a negative experience, I just think it's my job to help you shift that so that it's at least a neutral experience.
Definitely.
Beyond that, suffering is non-comparable, isn't it? So being able to say, oh, well, a lot of people have come in and said, I'm embarrassed to suggest that I have trauma. And I get that because I've helped frontline personnel, soldiers, police officers, and to say their traumas are the same as somebody else's who may have just been in a more low-level environment. But the nervous system doesn't care about that. All the nervous system really cares about is that it had an experience. Potentially it didn't process that experience properly. And so now that's creating a reverberation back to now, back to your present moment. So that's all we have to care about. And if we're too stuck in the labels, then I think that can get in the way. I always like to think of it, we've got a past, a present, and a future, and the problem usually exists in all three of those states.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. Until it's cleared, it's there.
Because we can only be here and now. Our nervous system remembers the past, and that's generally where that problem's occurred. It's stuck in our fight or flight response. It's stuck often in our body as well.
Yes.
Then our mind is going off, projecting into the future.
Absolutely.
And having all of those experiences of what it can't do, what will be a problem, how it will experience that problem in the future. And so then that's bringing it back into your here and now for you to experience in the future as well. So when we're dealing with these things, I really like to deal with it in those three states as well to make sure, because fair enough, it happened in the past. But often we'll find that people, especially people that have had childhood traumas, maybe child abuse and god-awful things like that, they've missed certain levels of their development. The amount of times earlier on when I was helping people before I really realized that we had to look at those three areas of past, the present, and the future, that they would come back to me and they'd say, it's not firing, it's not happy, the experience wasn't there anymore. But then they'd say, but I don't know who I am now.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? Because all of a sudden, that's one of the things I love. I love doing the work with that person to do that. But then I also love the continuation of not only clearing the trauma, but helping them establish the things to move forward, to have the confidence, to have the motivation, to find the new way of living in that life after having cleared all of that. Because especially if something has been there that they're aware of, say anxiety or something like that, all of their life, to move forward and live in a life now that there's no anxiety, the body is almost fumbling a little bit about, okay, I'm not responding in that way. How do I respond? What do I do? How do I feel? What's happening? And you almost relearn a little bit on how to be in the world. And like you said, you do miss some of those maturing milestones when you're stuck in that. And I think it's fascinating that oh my goodness, people go through life not understanding that they'll just say, that's just my life. That was just how I grew up. That was just what it was. And when they start telling you about it, you're like, oh my goodness, all of that happened to you. And they just think that was just my life, which it was their life. But there were things there that now can really be causing some of those things that you're experiencing, whatever it is. It amazes me. And I didn't have a full understanding until learning so much about hypnosis that our subconscious does control so much of our physical body. So the pain that's there, the chronic fatigue, the IBS, those types of things can be coming from those things that happen throughout our life.
If we think about those experiences being stuck in our limbic system, in our fight or flight response, and then that being activated for too long, and then the cortisol being so high for such long periods of time, creating so much inflammation, switching off systems that we really want to be running with, our immune system, our digestive system, our reproductive system, all is so massively affected by this. It would only be natural that over time, with that level of inflammation, that the dulling of those really important systems, we could then take on unfortunate illnesses. And so it was freeing people from that response. It's also freeing them from not necessarily the conditions that it's caused, but at least they're not being exacerbated with further and further problems. At least we're offering people to spend more time in rest and digest so that then they can start to heal. They can start to get some peace.
Yes. Yes. Oh my goodness. And for someone who has not had even an understanding for a long time, if ever, of what that actual peace feels like, or to relax through the process of hypnosis when they are in that fight or flight for most of their life, or even for a long period of time, and their body is up in that angst. And for them to come down, and even just for that time period, sometimes there's such an awe in them of, oh my goodness, I had forgotten what that felt like, or I can't believe I was able to relax that much. And hypnosis is like magic to me when it does that for someone. I know with my own work with the people that you talk about in frontline people, whatever it is, medical, fire, police, military, that it is a lot harder because they have an alertness and a natural state of being in such an awareness, a hyper awareness for their work that they do, that kind of turning that down a little bit is interesting for them. Do you find that happens with them when you're working?
Yeah, I mean, this is about relearning themselves, isn't it? It's almost disorientating to begin with. There was a gentleman actually just in my room at the start of this week, I think it was, and you could see the surprise, almost confusion on his face over it not firing, that level of angst, that level of discomfort that had that idea of it's just my personality, it's just my life, it's just how I am. And all of a sudden, 90 minutes later, it's not. And that quietness, that calmness, it is disorientating to start with. The other most important work that we need to be doing is around recalibrating people, is normalizing. And then I find as well with a lot of people, it's originally then that fear that it's going to come back. There's the yeah, but, and of course, yeah, but, how would you not think yeah, but? It's maybe a silly analogy, but I often will say to people, it's a bit like a sneeze. If you didn't sneeze, how long would it take you before you realized you hadn't sneezed? If you never sneezed again in your life, unless you were given an example, you noticed someone else sneezing or someone really pointed it out to you, how long until you noticed that it didn't fire? But you're not going to believe it if you've been having constant sneezing. It's the same with phobias, with traumas, when the brain has so instantly been going to this state. How would you believe that that's not going to happen? And how would you believe that 90 minutes in or a couple of 90-minute sessions in that it's gone? I get why that's really difficult, and I get why that's so disorientating for people, but what a pleasure, what an honor. I've always found that people will put so much trust in a stranger, then to be able to, what, as for instance, the next time you see them and they come back and they say, well, it's a week or it's 2 weeks later, and no, I can't find it. Or even in that room when you're saying, try and find it and find that you can't. And you can see it just not firing, because with our experience, we know that that is the case. But then when you know that they're going to get to go and have that experience of being free of it, of all the disorientations that I'm all right with leaving somebody with. Yeah.
That's a good one. What basically led you into working with trauma and the difficulty of PTSD and some of those wonderful labels that they do put out there for people? Did you have something that you cleared yourself? Did it just kind of feel like that was the direction you needed to go in? How'd that play out for you?
I'm fortunate enough that I've never had anything that I would sort of class as having been traumatic in that way. I've been surrounded by a lot of people with trauma for a lot of time. I would say it's very close to my life, and it was quite a natural thing. I saw it coming to me, I'll be honest, more than I sought it out in meditation classes, in breathwork sessions and the likes, and at those points having to go away and learn a bit more as you're learning to facilitate these sorts of things. It's mentioned that people might have large reactions. It's mentioned that people might be coming because of those sorts of things, but you don't have any more than maybe compassion for it at that point. I can't say I had any real understanding back then of the mechanisms of it, of how the brain was functioning. And it was more remedial on my part.
Yeah.
And then once I opened Horwich Hypnotherapy, then I've never had a niche or anything like that. If you want help, I will help you. I guess that's my niche.
For the people that need help, that's my niche.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Oh, I mean, it's all kind of the same thing to some degree, isn't it? But then I had people coming along. I remember being very, very early into this part of my career, having a gentleman who had gone through some really extreme stuff and working through it with him. And even at that point, I was quite amazed by how rapidly it was cleared and how he was coming back and reporting to me how he'd started venturing further out into life. His world had become very, very small. We live in quite a small small town in the north of England. And this town had become his world because it was predictable enough. It was safe enough. And even that, it was only small areas of this that he was doing. And then he would tell me that he'd gone off, he'd driven into the city. Previously, there had been a place he had tried to drive into and then he couldn't get past that and he'd driven back. And this is when the trauma really kicked in. That's when his world had started getting smaller and smaller. So then he started going and testing those boundaries and finding that they didn't exist anymore. I mean, it was almost overwhelming. I was so grateful for that opportunity. And then I thought, well, I need to learn. So I just immersed myself at that point in every bit of learning around this. One of my biggest inspirations has been around the memory reconsolidation side of things. Bruce Ecker, really, really interesting. I always think of it a bit like, apologies for it sounding a bit dense, but with a read-write file on a computer and then a read-only file. And so when these memories are created, they get saved into that read-only. And we see this with trauma a lot. People know intellectually this isn't that. A veteran knows intellectually that this is in Afghanistan or Iraq. Emotionally, that file can only be read. It can't be rewritten anymore. Or that's that original idea of it. So then that memory reconsolidation is around creating or taking it back to being a read-write file so that we can give them the new information.
That's a good analogy. I think that's dense at all. I often when I'm explaining the subconscious, that it's a hard drive. And when we are little, that those programming is put in and established. And oftentimes we need to go in and update that and hit delete on some of the files and add in some things. So it is a lot like. And the people that are stuck or in that situation, they are stuck with the files that are in there, the situation, and they can't change them. It's on that loop and it's painful and difficult. And I don't think people understand. My heart goes out because I watch all the struggles, and even just with some of the groups I'm in online and things like that, with people who are suffering from PTSD, people who are spouses or family members with people that are in that situation, and they don't understand what's happening. And so when you don't understand something, it's scary. It's difficult. It causes anger in you. It causes frustration. It causes feeling lost, all of the things. And I just want to say, no, let me explain what's happening. Which you can do sometimes, but you can't because some people don't want to hear it or aren't ready to. And I understand that.
No, I think that that's probably my favorite part, not my favorite part of my job, but something that I carry so much passion for, carrying it, as we've spoken about, into sort of my other business, and everything is more around the psychoeducation, because you come in here having been suffering from these same conditions, being stuck in these same loops for maybe even sort of 50 plus years with some people I've met, and you naturally feel like this is you. A lot of people have used really, really unfair terms towards themselves of being broken.
Yes. I hate that.
It's so natural, isn't it? You know, to have just thought, oh, well, that broke me. So being able just to educate people on how this is a natural system. Crazily enough, this is your brain trying to do you a favor. And then just to go back to our sort of dodgy analogy, because once we've educated and then we're looking at making the change, I think that's the thing, is change. And I like to think, you remember Indiana Jones, and he was like robbing that gold idol just before like the big ball came and chased him down the tunnel. Well, he had to switch it out as quick as he did, yeah? Now, he obviously didn't do it quick enough, or he didn't weigh it out correctly, I don't know. But I don't think you can leave it. It's always about exchange. It can't necessarily be, what do you want to feel? Well, I don't want to feel anything. Okay, well, you're always going to have something. So what do you want to feel instead? And that's such a huge question, isn't it? That instead. What are you going to do instead? What are you going to feel instead? How do you want to see this instead? Because that's where we can do that exchange.
Absolutely. And it's okay to say that you want to feel neutral towards it, or you want to feel okay, or, I mean, it doesn't have to be an extreme. Even we don't need to be in the extreme. It's just about dialing something down or dialing it up just a little bit, maybe dialing down as far as possible on something until it can totally be cleared, which absolutely is possible. Something you said about people thinking things about themselves, that kind of gets me fired up, because people will be told, well, this is just something you have to live with. You'll have to negotiate or find coping mechanisms or do these things. And it's absolutely not true. You don't have to live with it for the rest of your life. You don't have to find coping mechanisms. You can clear it. You can clear those things. You are not too broken to be healed.
It's never too late.
It's never too late. You're right. I actually have someone I've been working with who's in her 70s, and she's like, I just need to clear up whatever it is, this little part that's there that I know something's not right. And she's having a few issues that were chronic and things like that. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. I would love to work with you. And moving her forward, even if it's the last part of your life, why not go in and feel the best you can feel for the last part of your life and do the thing that finally kind of lets you feel the freedom of not having those things be a part of you anymore.
Absolutely. Not have that weighing on your soul, not have that dragging you down for even the final moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's whatever it can be. Whenever the amount of people that have said to me, oh, why didn't this happen to me sooner? Why didn't I find this earlier? And there's often not a good answer to that. I find it quite amazing that I don't need to know what happened to you. Often I don't want to know what happened to you. Unless you want to talk about it, I'm willing to listen. But unless you want to do that, then hell, let's not talk about it. I'm not going to make you relive it. The only thing that you're going to experience is whatever plays out in your mind anyway. We're going to do that in a safe way. And we're only going to do that so that it doesn't happen again, which is so exciting, isn't it?
It is. And I find it so fascinating because when we do that, some people will remember things clearly. Some people will remember little things, little blobs, and some people remember nothing of the whole process because, again, our subconscious is doing what it can to protect us, to keep us alive, to move forward and do its job. And it might mean that we're going to process this, but we're going to process it in a way that you don't necessarily remember because that would just be more difficult for you. And that's okay. I tell people you're not going to do it wrong when you come into hypnosis. You're not going to do it wrong. Don't worry. However it plays out for you is okay and right.
As long as you're trying. This is the only thing, isn't it? It doesn't matter if it's vivid, if it's vague and a dull memory. As long as you're trying to do what we're asking you to do, then the chances are you're going to have the results there and then.
Yes. And I am so grateful for that I'm able to help someone move through some of that. And I'm so grateful that you're there to do that as well, that you took on that mantle as well to step up and do the magic that is there. And I love to call it magic because when I see things happen, to me it is magical. There's this whole big aha in their life and a whole new way of being. One of the reasons I do these podcasts is because it's still, unfortunately, oftentimes the last ditch effort to come to hypnosis. And I really want it to be more like the first thing that you come do is hypnosis. Everybody sometimes needs someone to talk to. So talk therapy absolutely has its place. Talk therapy is great when you need that back and forth with someone to just have a conversation or talk something out. But it doesn't cure the problem in my experience or in my sense of talking with other people. It has its place, absolutely. So do a lot of the other therapies that are out there. But going in a short period of time, a very short period of time with hypnosis and being able to clear those things instead of sitting and reliving them and having to go through that conversation for years is a no-brainer on the choice scale for me. I would definitely go in and say, let's get rid of this as quick as possible right now. If you can do that, let's do this. And we can do that.
You know what? I agree so much. And usually we're the last port of call. Generally, it's people that are beyond desperate. However, the biggest thing I think I need from somebody is that they're going to give themselves permission. It's something that I talk a lot about is giving yourself permission to have this experience, give yourself permission to make this change. And sometimes guilt or whatever it might be, it's only through those talking therapies. I totally agree that they don't always shift you from where you are to where you want to be, but sometimes they make the initial change where you understand it's not your fault. The guilt, the shame, the hurt, the pain, whatever, that emotional side of it that gets people stuck from even being willing to shift. We look at maybe the survivor of something where others in that incident didn't survive. Sometimes those people almost feel like they're meant to carry that pain along with them.
That's true.
And it's not necessarily always our position, or we're not always necessarily as hypnotherapists qualified to be having those therapeutic conversations to work through those earlier stages. Sometimes we are, and sometimes that is only giving you a new perspective. But yeah, I think every therapy has its place. But yeah, the sooner we can get people in here when they're ready to do the work, brilliant, isn't it?
Yes. And I think that's key when they're ready. They have to be at that precipice of, I must have change. I must have change. It has to change now. I know it's kind of terrible almost to say, but I love working with those people as well because they are like, yes, absolutely. I want the change. Let's do this. And it happens. It happens. Instead of someone who's like, well, I think I kind of want to change this, but I don't know. They're the ones that are, it's like, we can try, but it might be a little harder until you're at that place where you definitely want change. And I'm finding actually that I'm going to be a little more discerning in the people that I work with because I've had a couple people who say they want change, but then as we're digging through and doing the work, they're like, well, I kind of still want to be able to do this or that with a habit that they said they wanted to break. And I'm like, well, guess what? Until you're ready to be at that place of change, it's not going to play out for you. But that's a learning process. Anyway, I wanted to make sure that everyone knows how to reach you. So if you can tell them, thank you so much for this conversation. It was so valuable and so important. And I loved your thoughts and the way that you kind of talked about the people that you work with and the direction that you want to head in. And I know you have some more things in the works and I'd love to talk about that some more. So we'll have another conversation. But right now, tell everyone where they can find you, Ben.
Well, it's been such a pleasure. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you having me on. Always like being branded. So Horwich Hypnotherapy, we're just missing.com is how you can find me. And then also it's not really up and running yet, but there's also change-works.co.uk, which is me moving into public speaking, into corporate wellbeing education. Mostly at the moment, you'll find me through Horwich Hypnotherapy, either online or here in the north of England if it's not too far for you.
I was going to say, I'm going to assume that you actually do online work as well as in-person work.
Whatever they want.
That's great. Yes, I work with a lot of people in the UK and I know the UK works with people in the US. So I think the internet and all the access that we have to be able to help people worldwide is crazy amazing and I'm grateful for it. All right then. Thanks for being here. Thanks Change Gang for the wonderful conversation and for you joining and being a part of it. And I hope that you go forward into the week and meet me same time next week. Ciao. I hope today's episode was interesting and helpful to you in some way. If so, find someone to share it with. Maybe it will help them too. If you'd like to know more about anything discussed here today, you can find all the places to connect with me and the guest speakers in the show notes. Or go to lauraordile.com, LauraOrdile.com, and you can reach out to me there. Until next time, ask when you need help, be kind to yourself, and have a happy day.